Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk Live. A reminder that this episode will also be on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. So please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Before I start and interview our awesome guest today, I want to talk a little bit about gratitude. For the last few days, I've been complaining about things in the food and agriculture system that I'm hearing about that have, either made me angry or made me sad. But what I want to just chat about a little bit is the food tank staff. We are a small and very scrappy, lean team. There are only three of us who are really full time. We have lots of volunteers and interns and fellows who work with us on a part-time basis. They are young and brilliant and passionate and bring me a lot of joy every day. We've been doing these incredible Zoom calls with them, and we're trying to pep them up a little bit. And they were telling me and my co-founder Bernie about their favorite books and what they're watching on Hulu. And they're all, they're not watching reality TV like I am a lot of the time. They're reading, Love in the Time of Cholera. They're watching documentaries. They're doing all this amazing stuff to learn. And these are kids who young people who had to leave school early in some cases. Our content manager, who is graduating from graduate school next week, is not going to have a formal ceremony, and it makes me sad for her, but she's so passionate about the work that she does that I am just it's really been what's keeping me going, talking to them every week and learning from them. They are the way smarter than I am at that age, and I was just blown away by their ability to adapt to this and work from home and still be engaged and want to make change and want to be part of the food system that's really unpredictable right now. And so I just wanted to give them a shout out. And again, Elena Seeley joined us a few weeks ago, about right before the lockdown, and she has been an incredible asset to Food Tank. So thank you, Elena. You are really a treasure for us, and I appreciate all of your hard work. I'll stop there. I'm really excited to talk to our guest today. Kellee James is the founder and CEO of Mercaris, a company that provides accurate, up-to-date information on market conditions for organic and non-GMO commodities, and their trading platform connects buyers and sellers in the organic product industry to meet online and trade. She has the most impressive and intimidating bio that I've read all week. She worked at the Chicago Climate Exchange, the first electronic trading platform and registry for spot futures and options on carbon, sulfur, clean energy, and other environmental derivatives. In 2009, she was appointed by President Barack Obama as a White House Fellow and was Crain's Chicago Business Magazine 40 Under 40 Rising Leader. She has all these other amazing accolades and things that she's done, and it would take me the whole 25 or so minutes that we have to go through her whole bio. But I'm thrilled that she's here, honored that she made the time. Kellee, I talked to Victor Friedberg this morning, and he wanted me to tell you hello. He did a great interview with us. So thank you so much. He is. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I so appreciate the chance to talk to you, Danielle.
Awesome. So I want to start off with COVID-19, obviously, and you issued a report recently about the virus's impact on agriculture. And I want to hear from you, sort of your biggest takeaways, and then maybe we can talk about what your biggest predictions are.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, like everyone, it's amazing how fast life can change. There's not a sector out there that's untouched by this, and food and agriculture is no exception. And of course, we've all come face to face with the reality that if you don't get food right, nothing else really matters. So first, just a little bit of a clarification. Mercaris, we our sort of wheelhouse, our sweet spot is watching the organic grain and oilseed markets, as well as some of the animal protein markets. So I will preface all my comments by saying we do, we realize fruits and vegetables, tree crops, permanent crops are impacted by this. It's not really our area of expertise to do deep analysis on those particular segments. So most of my comments will be targeted towards grain, oil seeds, and some animal agriculture
Absolutely.
comments. And so a couple things we've noticed, some things when it comes to organic food and ag production, there are some things that are very unique to it when you compare it to the conventional food and ag sector, and yet we're all in this, together, so to speak. And then so there are some dynamics that are similar to the conventional food and ag supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
So some ways that it's unique. Organic is where it's consumed. We for the most part, organic is consumed in the home. You go to the grocery store, you buy your organic cereal or your organic eggs, and then you take them home and cook them and eat them. You're not eating organic most of the time at school or in chain restaurants, large
Mm-hmm.
restaurants. There's some farm to table restaurants where you would, but most of it is in fact in home versus institutional. So that's one big difference. I can go into others, but I wanted to stop there for just a second.
No, and I mean, I think that's such an interesting point, because then what you're saying is that it's not that part of the industry, the organic industry, the grain and oilseed market and animal protein, they're not being affected as much. In fact, the demand is probably rising because people are cooking more at home.
Right. So, the big story was you see all these pictures online on Twitter and whatnot of farmers having to dump milk or having to euthanize hogs because they just, the restaurant channels are not there anymore. Organic has had the opposite story. There's been a spike in demand as people were driven back to the grocery store. And so in that case, we haven't had those types of disruptions. We've had other types and other things are starting to happen. So one place where we're similar to conventional is all these animals have to be processed somewhere.
Right.
And workers that process animals are working in close quarters. It's a place where social distancing is hard to maintain. And so we've seen the first news of workers in organic poultry and processing locations getting sick, which is causing either slowdown or disruption in processing. So
yeah, that is very similar to what's happening with like Tyson and Perdue and others.
Right.
You mentioned that if we don't get food right, we're not going to get anything right.
Yeah.
And so can we unpack that a little bit more? I mean, this is a real opportunity in so many ways. It's such a tragedy for sure. There's no doubt, but it's such an opportunity. And we've been talking to people for the last 5.5 weeks, experts like yourself, who are saying this is a moment that we have to sort of take on and really rethink what happens after COVID-19.
Yeah, it's been interesting to me with social media and just, I don't know how you feel about your own life, but I feel like I spend time in different worlds. You spend all this time in the ag world, and then you realize you talk to maybe, at least for me, someone who grew up not on a farm, not as part of the farming community. I have all these friends and family that have no idea what goes on at the farm level or at the infrastructure level. And I think what's interesting to me is I've seen the consumer, the average consumer, if there is such a thing, paying such close attention to the food supply chain. All of a sudden, we've got stories about what farm workers are suffering and why they can't maintain social distancing, why they're so vulnerable to COVID. And it's part of the conversation in a way I have not seen before. And people understanding that it's more than just, well, I go to the grocery store and pick up something. There's a whole system behind that. And like any system that humans create, there are some big weaknesses there. And COVID is putting those weaknesses into stark relief. And so to me, it's an opportunity to think about, equity from the grocery store worker who's making, barely minimum wage to the processor, who's responsible for, an incredible amount of it's very skilled, dangerous, difficult work to process an animal, to, farm workers who are out there in the fields. And I have even seen some interesting conversations. There's been the sort of vegetarian vegan movement that's, sometimes very fraught with conflict with those that believe that animals should be part of agriculture. And a lot of times that's been framed as sort of an animal rights type issue. Well, I'm now seeing it as, people saying, I'm going vegetarian because I don't want to be part of a system that exploits workers. I mean, the irony is workers are exploited, in the plant side thing too. The plant side things are things too, but they're looking at pictures and hearing news stories of workers getting sick en masse at big animal processing plants and saying, how can I be part of that? It's unconscionable.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of eye-opening going on. What was invisible before is now very visible because
Hmm.
of shortages at grocery stores or people seeing these things on the news that they probably had never imagined before.
Right.
And for a lot of us, I've been to more slaughterhouses than I can count, to be honest. I've seen processing plants, and having that sort of made more widely known to other people is honestly very gratifying for me, because
Yeah.
people should know where their food comes from, and they
Right.
should know how workers are
Right.
treated.
Right.
You started to talk a little bit about how consumers' behavior, how eaters' behavior will change with more people sort of seeking out these vegan products and vegetarian products. And I talked to Victor Friedberg a little bit this
Mhm.
earlier today about that. And there's been such an incredible rise in the demand for plant-based meats. And it's so interesting to me. Victor, said it's a lot of different things people are hoarding, because they're concerned. But I
Sure.
also believe it's what you pointed out, that people are like, oh, I don't want to be part of this system that exploits workers. What sort of concerns me, though, and I've been somebody who hasn't eaten meat since I was 13 years old, but
Hmm.
I don't want animal farmers to be blamed
Right.
unnecessarily for this. And Victor and I talked about that too. And I don't want this vegan versus animal agriculture debate to keep going on, because I think we've made so many big strides of how, that these things
Hmm.
are not mutually exclusive. So
Right.
how, from your perspective, because you're so interested in the organic animal agriculture sector, and it's so important for agriculture in general, especially regenerative practices that
Right.
we're all,
Right.
that build soils. We need that manure. How do we sort of reconcile all of those things?
I mean, that is a great question. If we figure out the answer to that question on this podcast, I think we should, hopefully it could be applied to any number of places, right? Because we're in such a place in our country where we're just backed into corners, and
Yeah,
it's such a tense moment. And there's almost no issue where you can't point to people being extremely, it's just extremely fraught with conflict right now.
yeah,
I try to come from a place of strength and listening. And like with the worker rights thing, I mean, there's a lot of there's conversation that processors have to be brought into. Um, a lot of farmers don't have any say. I mean, they drop their animal, they sell their animals to the packers, and
right,
that's kind of the end of the story. That's where their influence, begins and ends.
right.
So I try to come from a place of, it's not helpful to blame people. It's helpful to have a, conversation. And there are, at the risk of sounding too much of a centrist, because I do believe that there are things that are evil in the world and should be called out. It's not just like all sides are, deserve to be heard. There are times when the answer
Sure.
is clear, and there's a clear moral authority. But I do think that a lot of the thorniest problems in the world are a tangle of gray areas, and no side has the perfect solution, or it would have been solved already. And so, coming at it from that point of view, I don't know, and it's hard to, it's hard to take something that's your life's work, right, and then hear someone criticize it. It's not just,
Absolutely.
it's very difficult. I try to, whenever I think I'm getting angry, I try to look at it as a reflection of what are the buttons that, push, my particular issues. It's very illuminative of my own, thought process, even more than the person who I might be talking with. So, and it's a kind of for me, a moment of self-reflection that doesn't point to a particular policy or action. It's more just a call of, self-regulation for all of us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that nuance really needs to be brought more into every conversation, whether we're talking about food and agriculture or national politics. Not
Hmm.
everything is, black or white. There's so much gray, as you
Right.
said. And I think bringing civility back into these conversations and having sort of a kinder, more reflective
Yeah.
attitude, as you also said,
Yeah.
I think is something we need.
I mean, one thing I think is important is the work that you're doing. It's one thing when the moment of crisis comes, if there's no relationship and there's no trust there, how do you have hard conversations? Whereas if you've got a running dialogue and there's some social capital built with disparate communities, then when you have these problems, you're working from a place of, if not complete trust, at least an established relationship where there's some respect. So.
Yeah, I mean, we've worked really hard over the last 7 years. I appreciate that so much, to have these sort of non-biased, non-confrontational, but uncomfortable conversations. I think
Hmm.
now is the time to really embrace the uncomfortableness of talking about these things, and
Yeah.
feeling challenged and challenging ourselves to think really differently. Um, when we're talking about animal agriculture, I've heard from a lot of folks that, who are interested in local and regional food systems, that we need to get back to more regional processing. And,
Yeah.
a lot of those facilities have just, over the last 20, 30, 40 years, they don't exist because of
Yeah.
consolidation in the meat industry. Can you talk a little bit? I know a lot of those folks in the organic movement have been pushing for that,
Right.
but USDA regulations often make it very difficult or
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm of the improv school of both and. I think that there needs to be space in the ecosystem for the big, the medium, and the small. And I think the reason for that is because, first of all, your consumers are different. We haven't figured out yet. I mean, what the current system does really well is get food cheap to the masses. And that's really important for folks. I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes it feels like the wrong conversation to have, to say, well, food needs to be it's okay if food is more expensive because, organic food, for example, by some measures is cheap. It's just accounting for the externalities that you don't see in conventional. If you're screwing up your, farm workers' health because they're exposed to chemicals, or there's, runoff from pesticides, there's a cost there. It's just that you're not seeing it captured in the price of the food. That's all well and good, except, I don't know. I have people in my family that can't afford to pay $1 extra, for the organic egg. They need to push that cost off. And the solution is like, well, why are their wages so low anyway? But the problem is that that's a somewhat academic argument for someone who's, staring at the grocery aisle and needs to feed their kids that night.
Sure.
And so for now, I think, the big, the medium, and the small need to coexist. The big can learn some lessons. A long time ago, I read an article by Wired magazine called Big, Smart, and Green. And it was about how big agriculture had to get greener, and it could use some of the techniques used by, small or medium-sized agriculture. And I think that's really important so if there are regulations that are artificially giving power to just a few entities and encouraging consolidation, that's not good.
Right.
Food safety is an issue. Small does not necessarily mean safe. So some of those regulations were originally put in place to keep us all safe, but do they go too far? So smart regulation versus, one size fits all regulation, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. I like that you mentioned bigger companies learning from smaller ones. We've had both Paul Willis from Niman Ranch Pork Company on the podcast. And a few weeks ago, we had Jim Perdue of Perdue Farms on the live cast. And, I've talked to Jim many times about, in 2015, just to give our viewers a sense of what happened, in 2015, Perdue acquired Niman Ranch Pork Company, but not in the typical sense of acquiring a company. They acquired it to learn from the practices that Paul and the farmers that he works with had put in place. And it was such an interesting, way to help a smaller company, because Perdue has a lot of resources that Niman didn't, and also to keep the integrity and the mission of Niman in place. It's Perdue gets criticized for a lot of things, and Niman got criticized for making that decision to be acquired. But I think it was brilliant looking at it, 5 years later, because they've both learned so much from each other.
Yeah.
And that's, you talking about big, medium, and small, and there being a place for them all. I think that's like the perfect example of it.
Yeah. There's a couple of good. I remember when Seth Goldman's, when Honest Tea was acquired by Coca-Cola, and that, I know he took a lot of flack for that, but it also, I think if I could channel Seth for a moment, he said, the distribution capabilities of Coca-Cola are so enormous. And if I want Honest Tea to make more, to be able to scale those good things, I need to be able to tap into that infrastructure, expertise, that type of thing. So
absolutely. You were talking about the cost of organic, and how when people are standing, in front of the egg case at the grocery store, and if organic is $1 more, that's a big decision. Honestly, that's a big decision for me sometimes. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I was frankly surprised that organic sales have gone up so dramatically during COVID because everyone's in such a precarious kind of economic situation.
Yeah.
All of us, we don't know what's happening tomorrow.
Right, right. Well, it's interesting. We looked back, there's no analogy for what's happening right now, but we did look back at the numbers from 2008 when we had the financial crisis and the recession. And, organic premiums in the grains, went away. I mean, they looked like conventional. It was this big shock to the system. But one other thing we noticed, I was talking with our head economist, Ryan Corey, organic has grown up a lot in that 10 years. It's gotten more efficient, hopefully without giving up some of the benefits that, the things that make it unique. And actually the premiums between organic and conventional as a whole have come down. It can be very competitive. I mean, there still is at the grocery, at the grocery store, when we see it at the grocery store, it's not just the cost of the underlying commodities and ingredients. It's a lot of that is packaging and marketing and that sort of thing.
Right.
But if you look at the price of the on the shelf, there is, in some cases, the premium has disappeared, almost entirely. In other cases, a lot of times it's just come down. So the consumer is maybe not getting quite as much of a price shock. It's also early days right now.
Right.
Not every, the impacts are going to continue to filter through. So we are concerned and watching about whether the consumer makes those choices. And the consumer may also not be, from their point of view, may not be spending, quote, more on food. If half of, 50% of food was consumed in restaurants where it is more expensive, you could still be buying organic and still be spending less on your overall food bill. So that we think also might be impacting consumer choices.
That's a great point. I want to turn now to, the demand for animal feed, organic animal feed versus food for people. And I know that's something that you're watching very closely.
Yeah, we so one thing in the grains that is again common with conventional is the grain markets, corn in particular, corn and soybeans, the demand is still largely driven by animal feed. Humans just don't eat a lot of dent corn, whether it's organic or conventional. But organic is even more impacted by animal feed because let's go back to our friend corn as an example. In the U.S., about 40% of the conventional corn crop goes to energy. It goes to ethanol.
Right.
You don't have that in organic. No organic corn is going to power your cars. And so from that respect, organic is even more impacted by the demand from animal feed than conventional is. Conventional has energy and animal feed, and then a little bit of use for human consumption. Organic pretty much just has animal feed and then a little bit for human consumption. So we think that that animal protein, whether it's going to egg producers, poultry, dairy, or beef and hogs, that's the thing to watch. The linchpin for demand for organic grains, corn and soybeans. It's a little different story when you talk about wheat or some of the other small grains, but for corn and soybeans, that's the thing to watch is animal production.
Okay. After doing the report you did on the potential impacts of COVID-19 on agriculture, what kind of concerns you the most right now? Is there one particular thing, or is it just the whole set of things?
Yeah, well, the big thing is, I was talking to someone who said they're kind of dividing the impacts into two phases. One is this immediate fallout from social distancing and the uncertainty that comes along with not knowing everything there is to know about the virus itself. And then there's the longer term sort of, I will call it self-inflicted wounds. How fast does the economy come back? How long does it take us to sort of achieve the conquer the virus? Whether it's through vaccines, which take a while, or through testing and tracing, which is taking way longer than we had hoped.
For sure.
So, that type of longer term impact where it's, there was the initial contraction, all 20 million Americans filing for unemployment in the space of, 3.5 weeks. And then there's the longer fallout as more and more people start losing their jobs and some of this becomes entrenched. What then? So I think it's the unknown that is the thing that's most worrying. And unfortunately, it's the thing I have the least data on. So I need a crystal ball and I just don't have one.
Yeah, we all need one right now. And I think what's very concerning is if, let's say things go better than we all expect and we're able to, get back to work, by the fall or early winter. And then there's that second phase of COVID-19, which experts are predicting. And then I was reading today that this is really a 2-year sort of cycle we should be looking at. And it's all very concerning. It's concerning for farmers. It's concerning for eaters.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
We've been talking to so many people who have embraced technology in different ways than they might have, pre-COVID. You have farmers markets that are going online or doing different things. Do you anticipate the organic sector embracing different kinds of technologies because of COVID?
Oh, that is a great question. I think, I do think the application of technology to organic is an underserved opportunity overall. And part of that is, when you're talking about technology investments, organic doesn't attract the type of capital investment, whether it's from, the venture sector or whether it's from, banks or insurance companies designing products for, organic. Agronomists. It's just smaller, and so it attracts a little less attention, less investment. So it's a huge opportunity, but because that opportunity is still kind of an unmet need, I think you won't necessarily see some of the fancy technology that is being deployed in conventional to organic. It's got to be adapted. It's got to be so much of the technology in conventional, for example, let's talk about the ag production side is, this precision technology. How do you apply chemicals better? How do you track that sort of thing? Well, it just doesn't translate exactly to organic since we don't use chemical inputs and we use other types of inputs, but those are often not optimized for those precision ag technologies that you see deployed in ag. And then, I think I won't go into too many, but that's one example of how there's opportunity for someone to get in and create those types of systems. But organic farmers, when the technology is there and is relevant to them, they've shown an appetite to embrace it. So, and the same thing on the other side of the platform, I've seen, blockchain adapted they try to adapt it for organic and identity preservation, not just organic. IP, the supply chain has some unique needs. How do you segregate? How do you track? How do you value all the way through the system? And those types of problems, I think, are tailor-made for technology-based solutions. So
absolutely. And we talk about this a lot at Food Tank, this idea of combining high and low tech. And I think the organic sector, there's no place where that probably works better.
Yeah.
You mentioned blockchain, and I think, right now and definitely post-COVID, traceability and transparency in the food system are going to be really important for consumers. And so the more that those sorts of things are employed, I feel like organic already has a lot of that already in place. They're doing it better than some of the conventional parts of the industry.
We've had to. So, again, there's another lesson learned that could be applied potentially to the conventional is when you've got to keep things segregated and track them, what types of best practices, whether, like you said, whether they're low tech or high tech, could be applied if that's your need, if traceability is your need on the conventional side.
Absolutely. Before I ask our last question, I want to make sure that people know where to get the report that I mentioned and also how to get more information about you and the work that you do. Can you give your website?
Absolutely. So anyone can go to mercaris.com. And all you have to do is create a free account, and then you can download the report COVID-19. We've also got some other free content there, and of course, if you need more extensive analysis, we've got a range of data and analytics products that can help you really get a handle on the sector.
And we'll have that website available on our social media and on foodtank.com. We'll also give the link to the report. We've written about Kellee many times too on Food Tank, so you can just Google her, but she was on our listicle of inspiring women in the ag tech sector not too long ago. So you continued.
A long time ago when Mercaris was more idea, more concept than reality, I remember, having a conversation, reaching out and getting to tap into a very supportive community was key. So thank you for all
so
that.
Good. Oh my gosh, no, it's my pleasure. So my last question for you is who is inspiring you the most right now? This is such a crazy, sort of scary time for all of us. And I'm constantly inspired by lots of people. So I wonder who's inspiring you.
There's so many people that inspire me. This is going to sound in some ways trite, but one reason I think sometimes you don't see as many women entrepreneurs or women of color, Black women entrepreneurs, is that a lot of times we provide support for others and we don't get the, we are the support system for lots of people. I am very fortunate, privileged to have a family that supports me. And my husband has been a big part of the reason that I have embarked on this journey. He is absolutely, handles pressure with grace, and I feel very thankful. He's my inspiration, and he's also my biggest supporter. So.
That's so great. That's such a great note to end on. That makes me want to cry a little bit. That's really sweet. Thanks so much, Kellee. It was great to see you. A reminder that this episode will also appear on our podcast, Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. And please join me back here at 1 p.m. Eastern time on Monday when I'll be talking to Chef Amy Sins from New Orleans. Thank you so much, Kellee. Please stay well.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.